The garage was locked from the inside. I was wearing an evening gown, and the most powerful gangster in America had spoken to me 3 days before. The investigation lasted 72 hours. I was 30 years old, at the peak of my career, running my own restaurant on the Pacific Coast Highway, and I had just said no to the most dangerous man in America. 3 days later, I was found in my car in a locked garage in an evening gown I had worn to a party 2 days before. The investigation lasted 72 hours. The case was closed as an accident. And the man whose name the investigation declined to treat as relevant continued operating for another 20 years without significant interference from anyone in a position to interfere. I want to be precise about what the evidence does and doesn't say, because precision is what this story has always been denied. The garage was locked from the inside. My injuries were inconsistent with simply losing consciousness in a car. The coroner noted this, and the investigation moved on regardless. The hours between when I was last seen leaving a party and when my car was found are unaccounted for in ways that a serious inquiry would have treated as the beginning of the work, rather than an inconvenience to be stepped around. None of that was treated seriously. All of it was noted, filed, and left there, unresolved, in a record that has been available for 90 years to anyone willing to look at it carefully. This is not a tragedy in the classical sense. It is not fate, not bad luck, not the inevitable cost of a life lived too brightly. This is a story about a specific woman who built something real, who knew what she was worth, who said no when no was the right answer and the dangerous answer simultaneously, and who was failed by every institution that should have asked the questions her death demanded. The pictures survived. The comedy survived. The restaurant is gone, and the case is closed, and the man whose name nobody wanted to say out loud is long dead too. What hasn't survived is the full accounting. I'm here to provide it. In my own words, at my own pace, without the 72-hour deadline. Let's begin. Let me tell you what they always leave out of the story. Before the garage, before the gown, before any of it, there was a woman who was genuinely, effortlessly funny. Not funny the way Hollywood wanted women to be funny in the 1930s, which was mostly decorative and slightly ditzy and designed to make the man in the scene look smarter by comparison. Actually funny. The kind of funny that comes from intelligence, from timing, from understanding exactly how absurd the world is and deciding to say so out loud. I had that. I knew I had it. And in the early 1930s, in the golden age of cinema, that particular combination, a woman who was beautiful and funny and completely unafraid to be both at the same time, was something the industry didn't quite know what to do with, but was very happy to put in front of a camera. I came up through the comedy pictures, the ones that moved fast and hit hard, and required you to hold your own against men who had been doing this for years. I held my own. More than held it. I found on those sets a version of myself that felt completely right, completely inhabitable, the precise fit between who I actually was and what the work required. That doesn't happen often in this industry. Most actors spend entire careers chasing that fit and never quite finding it. I found it early, and when I found it, I knew it. And the knowing of it gave me a confidence that I think some people mistook for recklessness. It wasn't recklessness. It was just the particular freedom of someone who knows exactly what she's good at. The restaurant came out of that confidence. My own place on the Pacific Coast Highway. The kind of establishment that in 1934 was the right location at the right moment for the right clientele. The industry crowd, the money, the people who wanted somewhere glamorous and relaxed and close enough to the beach that the whole thing felt like a holiday, even on a Tuesday night. I built that. Not with a partner, not with a man's money behind me, not as someone's wife or someone's project. I built it as a businesswoman who understood her market and her moment and her own name well enough to put it on the door. That was the version of my life that felt like the future. The restaurant, the work, the independence. That was what I was building toward when the wrong conversation happened. The industry in 1934 was not the cleaned up version that gets remembered in the retrospectives. It was loud and fast and morally flexible in ways that the studios worked very hard to manage publicly and ignored entirely privately. The money was extraordinary. Pictures were making fortunes even in the middle of the Depression, maybe especially in the middle of the Depression, because people needed somewhere to go that wasn't their own lives for 2 hours. And where extraordinary money goes, extraordinary characters follow. The studio executives were not gentlemen. The producers were not gentlemen. The social world that surrounded the industry, the parties, the restaurants, the private clubs, the arrangements that never made the fan magazines, was populated by people who understood power in the specific way that people understand power when they have a great deal of it and are accustomed to getting what they want. I moved through that world with fluency because fluency was survival. You learned the room. You learned who was connected to whom, who owed what to whom, which friendships were genuine and which were strategic, and which were both simultaneously, in the way that Hollywood friendships tended to be. I was good at people. Genuinely good, not performatively good. I remembered things. I noticed things. I could make anyone in a room feel like they were the most interesting person in it, which is a skill that sounds simple and is actually extremely rare. That skill, as it turned out, had a shadow side. It meant that people with bad intentions experienced my attention as encouragement. They were wrong about that. But by the time the misunderstanding became clear, the situation had already developed in directions I hadn't anticipated. The restaurant put me at the intersection of everything. The industry came to eat. The money came to be seen. And the other world, the world that ran parallel to Hollywood, that financed certain things and controlled certain people and operated with a directness that the studio system could only dream about. That world came too. You couldn't run a successful establishment on the Pacific Coast Highway in 1934 and pretend that world didn't exist. It existed. It had appetites like everything else, and it had, at its center, a man whose name I will not say in this room, but whose reach extended considerably further than anyone in the legitimate industry was entirely comfortable acknowledging. He came to my restaurant. He was charming, the way that genuinely dangerous men are often charming. Completely, attentively, without the slight distraction you feel from men who are only performing charm. He wanted something. I didn't yet know what. He came back. That's the first thing to understand. He came back more than once, which in itself was a statement. Men like him don't return to places where they haven't been made to feel welcome. And I had been. I want to be clear about this. Professionally welcoming. The restaurant was a business. He was a customer. The line between those two facts and what he was actually proposing was something I navigated carefully, precisely, and with the kind of smile that communicates absolutely nothing about what the person behind it is actually thinking. What he wanted was the upstairs. My restaurant had space above it, rooms, private space, the kind of layout that in his world had a specific and well-understood purpose. A gambling operation. His operation, running out of my building under the cover of my name and my license and my legitimate business. The arrangement he was describing was not presented as optional. It was presented the way men like him presented everything, as an opportunity, phrased in the language of generosity, with the understanding underneath that declining the opportunity was not a category of response he had made available. I understood the subtext completely. I had been understanding subtext my entire career. I said no. I want to be precise about what that no cost me and what it didn't. In the room, in the moment, it cost me nothing visible. He was too controlled for visible reactions, too experienced at these conversations to show anything as readable as anger. He nodded. He finished his drink. He left. And for a few days, I told myself that was the end of it, that a man of his stature had other operations and other buildings and other people more amenable to his proposals, and that my no had been received as a no and filed accordingly. I was not naive enough to fully believe that. But I was busy, and the restaurant was doing well, and the pictures were coming, and it is very easy to not look directly at a threat when everything around you is bright and moving fast. I didn't look directly at it. I should have. Let me give you the good part first, because it was genuinely good, and it deserves to be said before everything else. In 1934, 1935, those years right at the peak of it, I was exactly where I wanted to be. The pictures were coming fast, and the work was real work, comedy with teeth, the kind of material that required everything I had and gave back twice as much. I was on a lot with people who were brilliant at what they did, directors who understood that funny is harder than serious and treated it accordingly, co-stars who pushed me and I pushed back, and the pushing made everything better. There is a specific joy in working at the top of your ability with people who are working at the top of theirs. I had that. For a sustained, luminous period of time, I had exactly that. The costumes in those years were extraordinary. Not the satin and glamour of the dramatic pictures, but something sharper, faster, built for movement and comedy and the specific physical intelligence that good screen comedy requires. I knew how to wear clothes the way some people know how to speak languages, naturally, without thinking, the garment becoming part of the performance rather than a distraction from it. The cinematographers liked working with me because I understood light intuitively, understood where it was falling and how to use it, which sounds technical but is actually about attention, about being present enough in a scene that you notice everything happening around you while appearing to notice nothing at all. That's the secret of screen comedy. Absolute awareness disguised as effortlessness. The restaurant in those evenings was everything I had imagined it could be. The right people at the right tables, the Pacific behind the windows, the particular electricity of a room where everyone present knows they are exactly where they are supposed to be. I would move through it after service, table to table, and I was good at it, genuinely good. The hostess as performance, the warmth real, but also precisely calibrated, the whole thing running on the same instincts that made the pictures work. I was 30 years old. I had built something real with my own hands and my own name. I had work I loved, and a place I'd made, and a future that looked like more of the same, better, bigger, mine. That was October 1935. December came very quickly after that. The party was on a Saturday night. Roland West's place up in the canyon, a gathering of the industry kind, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and the conversation runs on gossip and ambition, and the particular energy of people who work in a business that never fully turns off, even at a party. I went. I was in good spirits. I wore the gown, the white gown, the one that would later become the detail everyone fixated on, as if the choice of evening wear was the clue that unlocked the whole mystery. It wasn't a clue. It was a dress. I wore it because it was a party, and I liked how it looked, and that was the full extent of the decision. I left the party in the early hours of Sunday morning. That part is documented. People saw me leave, noted the time, noted that I seemed fine, noted nothing that suggested what the next 48 hours would produce. What happened between that moment and the moment my car was found in the garage on Monday morning is the part the investigation declined to pursue with any seriousness. There are accounts. There are versions. There are people who claimed to have seen me, spoken to me, received phone calls from me during those missing hours. The accounts don't entirely align. In a serious investigation, misaligned accounts are the beginning of the work. In the investigation that was conducted into my death, they were apparently the end of it. Monday morning, my car in the garage locked from the inside. Me in the front seat in the white gown, the dress from Saturday's party, which meant that wherever I had been in the intervening time, I had not been home to change. The coroner said carbon monoxide. The investigation said accident. The case was closed in 72 hours with a speed that, in retrospect, tells you everything about who needed it closed and how much authority they had to make that happen. 72 hours. I want you to hold that number, not as a detail, but as a decision. Someone decided. And the decision was made very, very fast. The garage was locked from the inside. I need you to stay with that fact because the investigation didn't, and the investigation's failure to stay with it is the single most revealing thing about what kind of inquiry this was. A locked garage. Locked from the inside, with a woman found inside who by every account had not returned home after Saturday night. That is not a fact that resolves itself cleanly into accident. That is a fact that generates questions, specific, concrete, answerable questions about who had access, who had keys, who was seen in the area, whose account of the relevant hours doesn't hold together under scrutiny. Those questions were not asked, or rather, they were noted briefly, and then the file moved on. The car's position was wrong. I was found slumped in the front seat, which is consistent with carbon monoxide, yes, but the specific details of how I was positioned, the condition of the gown after 2 days, the state of my injuries, which went beyond what the official cause of death required, those details were entered into the record and generated no follow-up. A fractured nose, bruising inconsistent with simply losing consciousness in a car. The coroner noted these things. The investigation did not explain them. It is possible to note something and then decline to pursue it, and that is precisely what happened here. A series of notations that would have been, in any serious inquiry, the beginning of the work, treated instead as the completion of it. And then there is the timing. 3 days before my car was found in that garage, I had been in a conversation that ended with a no. A no delivered to a man whose professional history included making inconvenient people disappear with a thoroughness and a speed that the legitimate world found difficult to match. I am not telling you he was responsible. I am telling you that a serious investigation would have treated that timing as significant, would have treated his name as relevant, would have asked the questions that his proximity to the situation demanded. The investigation that was conducted did not treat his name as relevant. It is worth asking why. It is worth asking who had the authority to make that determination and what their relationship was to the world he operated in. Hollywood in 1935 had a great many relationships it preferred not to examine too carefully. Mine was apparently one of them. The speed of it is what I keep coming back to. 72 hours from the discovery of my body to a closed case is not the pace of an investigation. It is the pace of a decision that had already been made before the investigation formally began. And decisions that move that fast in that direction in that town in 1935 do not move on their own. They move because someone with authority over the process has determined the destination, and the investigation is simply the route taken to arrive there with the appearance of procedure. I was a visible person. My name was known. My restaurant was frequented by people who mattered. The circumstances of my death were, by any objective measure, sufficiently irregular to warrant serious inquiry. The inquiry that happened was not serious. Someone made sure of that. The district attorney's office closed the case as accidental death. The coroner's findings, with their inconvenient details about injuries that didn't fit the official narrative, were entered into the record and left there, unresolved, like furniture in a room that nobody wanted to rearrange. The press covered the story for a week. The glamour of it was irresistible. The evening gown, the locked garage, the Hollywood backdrop, and then moved on, because in 1935, the press moved where it was directed, and the direction was away. The studio issued a statement of grief. My co-stars attended the funeral. The restaurant eventually closed. The man whose name nobody in the official investigation appeared to find relevant continued operating for another 2 decades with remarkable impunity. What I want you to understand about how this works, about how a closed case stays closed, is that it requires active maintenance, not conspiracy in the dramatic sense, not a room full of people coordinating their lies, but something quieter and more durable than that. It requires people in positions of authority to consistently choose not to look, to consistently find reasons why the questions that present themselves are not worth pursuing, to consistently prefer the tidy version over the true one. That preference, exercised repeatedly by enough people with enough authority, produces outcomes indistinguishable from a cover-up, without anyone having to explicitly agree to cover anything up. The system does it automatically, the way a body produces antibodies, not because anyone instructs it to, but because that is how systems built to protect certain interests respond to threats to those interests. I was a threat. The system does it automatically, the way a body produces antibodies, not because anyone instructs it to, but because that is how systems built to protect certain interests respond to threats to those interests. I was a threat. The system responded. The case is still closed. Here is what I want you to know about the version of me that got preserved. The fan magazines ran memorial pieces about the ice cream blonde. That was the name they had given me, the name that stuck, the name that reduced everything I was to a hair color and a sweetness that I possessed in real life approximately never. The obituaries mentioned the pictures, mentioned the comedy, mentioned the restaurant in the way you mention something that has become a footnote to a more dramatic story. Nobody wrote about the business acumen. Nobody wrote about the intelligence that produced the timing. Nobody wrote about the woman who built something with her own name on the door and ran it well and said no to the wrong man and paid for it. That woman was considerably more interesting than the ice cream blonde, and she got considerably less coverage. The pictures survived, which is something. You can still watch them. The comedies, the ones where everything I actually was shows up on screen undiluted. The timing, the intelligence, the particular quality of attention that made the work real. The work survived the system that produced it, which is the best possible outcome for anyone who does this for a living. I made things that lasted. That matters. What doesn't last, what got buried with the same efficiency that buried the investigation, is the fuller account. The businesswoman, the woman with ambitions beyond the screen, the woman who looked at a powerful and dangerous man and said no without visible hesitation, and understood exactly what she was doing when she said it. What I want to leave you with is this. My story is not primarily a story about how I left this world. It is a story about how I lived, fast, funny, fully, on my own terms for as long as my own terms were available to me. The garage is the ending, but it is not the point. The point is the restaurant on the Pacific Coast Highway, and the comedies that made people laugh during the hardest decade of the century, and the particular freedom of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth and acted accordingly. They closed the case in 72 hours. They did not close the story. The story is still open, and the woman at the center of it was considerably more than what fit in a headline. She deserved better than 72 hours. She deserved the full accounting. This is as close as we're going to get. So now you have what the 72-hour investigation didn't produce. A full account, told by the person it happened to, without the institutional pressure to arrive at a tidy conclusion before the questions got uncomfortable. And I want to ask you something before you go. Not about me specifically, about the pattern. Because my story is not unique in its mechanics. A powerful man, a woman who said no, a death under circumstances that didn't quite fit the official explanation, an investigation that moved with suspicious speed toward a predetermined conclusion. That pattern did not begin with me, and it did not end with me. What makes my case visible is the evening gown and the locked garage and the Hollywood backdrop, the elements that made it a story worth telling in the fan magazines, even as the real story was being buried underneath the version that was safe to print. The golden age of cinema was built on the labor and the silence of people who understood that certain questions were not safe to ask. I understood that. I asked one anyway, not with words, but with a no delivered to someone who was not accustomed to hearing it. The cost of that no is what you now know. What I want you to take from it is not caution. I was not a cautious woman, and I don't recommend caution as a general life strategy. What I want you to take is attention. The specific, sustained attention that the official investigation refused to give to the circumstances of my death. The attention that looks at a locked garage and a fractured nose and a 72-hour timeline and asks, who decided this was sufficient? Who had the authority to make that decision? What was their relationship to the man whose name nobody wanted to say? I was funny and I was smart and I built something real and I said no when no was the right thing to say. They found me in an evening gown in a locked garage and closed the case before the week was out. Both of those things are true, and the distance between them is the whole story. The distance between what I was and what was done, between what the evidence showed and what the investigation concluded, between the woman who deserved a full accounting and the headline that was printed instead. Share this. Talk about it. Come back for the next one, because there are more stories like mine. Women who built things and said no, and were failed by the systems that should have protected them. Every single one of them deserves better than 72 hours.